15 minutes after 8 o'clock, and Thamsanqa Msiza is a senior tax consultant at Tax Consulting SA. And you will have heard today that SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter announced today that SARS has lifted their tax return threshold from 350,000 rands to 500,000 rands. Thamsanqa, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Good evening, Aubrey, and good evening to your listeners.
So while people were popping the cork saying, yay, I earn 499,000 rands, I don't have to hand in my tax return, there are certain things that we need to be aware of that may be pitfalls if you are not listening carefully. Tell us about that.
Definitely. I think perhaps taxpayers need to, before you pop the cork, you need to watch out for a few of the other requirements. And that is, it's okay to say that, okay, fine, I earned less than 500,000 Rand employment income. But you also have to have earned that income from one employer throughout the tax year. And you've earned no other income. That, for example, you haven't earned any interest or dividends. And as well as you do not have any deductions. That will be like retirement contributions deduct against your income, or medical deductions. Then if you tick all those boxes, then you would not, SARS says you do not have to submit the tax return.
So if I understand you correctly, Thamsanqa, if your gross annual income is above 500,000 rands, regardless of the sources from which you are getting that income exceeds 500,000 rands, then you need to hand in a tax return.
Correct. So if your income is above 500,000 rand, you will have to submit a tax return. But Aubrey, there's one issue that taxpayers really need to be careful about, and the requirement of having only one employer. Taxpayers must not misunderstand, or I fear maybe taxpayers will misunderstand this requirement because it doesn't say specifically from a South African employer. So what I'm trying to say is that if a taxpayer is earning employment income, let's say below the 500,000 Rand mark, however is working for a foreign employer, in that instance, the taxpayer would need to submit a tax return, and that's just because that foreign employer has no requirement to withhold pay as you earn, for example. So if you're working in Belgium, let's say Aubrey works in Belgium for a Belgian company, the Belgian company isn't withholding pay as you earn and paying that to SARS. But you see the requirement still hangs there on Aubrey to submit the tax return because essentially Aubrey hasn't paid any taxes on that income, even if it's below 500,000.
But I seem to have heard the commissioner even refer to things such as if you have a car allowance, for example, that is considered to be a form of income. And if it in any way pushes you over the threshold of 500,000 rands, you still need to submit a tax return. Thamsanqa?
And yes, that is correct. So if you are earning a car allowance, you will have to submit a tax return. However, again, perhaps the second point where we can say that this is the second point where the notice is a bit vague. It makes no mention of what if you're an employee who is not only, let's say it's not a car allowance that you have, but you have a company car. And that is treated the same way. It receives the same sort of withholding tax treatment as a car allowance. And it will be a mistake if, as a taxpayer, you look at this notice and you say, fine, I don't have a car allowance, although I do have a right of use or I have a company car, I don't submit the tax return. And in that instance, you would need to submit the tax return.
When does the next tax season begin officially, Thamsanqa? And will there be some sort of amnesty for those people who might have misunderstood the message from the commissioner?
Well, the tax season, according to the commissioner, it is a bit of a confusing situation here. For someone who's already on e-filing, that tax season kicks off the 1st of July 2019, if I'm not mistaken, from his notice.
Yep.
And if it's someone who has to submit a tax return manually, they can only then start doing so on the 1st of August.
Yep.
And might be some confusion for taxpayers, especially those who would then reckon, I don't have to start now, I can wait for August. And also further, there'll be more confusion when that taxpayer, let's say, who is not on e-filing, thinks that, I've got until the 4th of December to submit the tax return.
Yeah.
Which is not the case. Tax season closes on the 31st of October for those who are filing manually. But in terms of whether SARS will have amnesty for that confusion, I think that's probably a question for SARS to answer.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But
from what we're seeing in this effort from SARS, it appears that they're trying to encourage taxpayers to get onto the e-filing profile, and then they are trying to reduce their administration.
Yeah. And there was talk of wanting to go into the rural areas to try and get more compliance from people living in the rural areas. How viable do you think that project is going to be?
Well, when it comes to compliance in the rural areas, that's a very good point you're making. But if I may, one point that I would rather make is that what about those taxpayers who earn well above the 500,000 and are not compliant?
Yeah.
I think the average taxpayer right now who is at home and who is submitting their tax returns would be, like us, a bit more concerned that SARS's notice or vague notice, it doesn't seem to instill some belief and some trust in the taxpayer that, let's bring about a new air of compliance, and let's say that we're going to go after the guys who are not paying taxes and earning high amounts, and let's even bring in the aspect of prosecution for those taxpayers who are not complying, to make an example and force compliance home.
Yeah. Would they not argue with regards to that, Thamsanqa, that the law is already there as far as that is concerned? Yes, we can argue about whether the law has been effectively used to make people comply, particularly those that are above the threshold of 500,000 rands in this instance. But would they not argue that the laws are there, and the reason why we, the new kids on the block, are here is to precisely do that? But what we want to do is we want to spread compliance to all corners of the Republic of South Africa, especially given the fact that we've just had a 3.2% slump in the GDP. We need all the money that we can get in order to be able to do all of the wonderful projects that the sixth administration is going to need us to make happen. You know what I mean?
They could raise that point and validly so, to say that, yes, I think we should all play our part. And, it's not just let's not just look at the guy right at the top, but everyone should play their part. But then I'm also sort of stuck with a bit of a question in that, because with this notice coming out, it is quite specific to a taxpayer, to those taxpayers who are not going to need to submit a tax return, and it's also vague. And in a situation where a taxpayer misreads this notice and then doesn't submit a tax return, wouldn't that just put us in a situation where now they have got a new administrative burden, and that is to sort of chase down the people who have, in all honesty and in bona fide, they have misunderstood the notice and haven't submitted a tax return.
Yeah. And that's why I was wondering whether maybe they've factored in their thinking some sort of amnesty for those who will have genuinely misunderstood the notice that was given today by the SARS commissioner. But here's another question for you, and final question from me, Thamsanqa. SARS has set itself an ambitious revenue target of 1.422 trillion for 2019-2020. which the new commissioner says it is striving to achieve. He said, and I quote, my confidence is not in the economy. I accept that it is what it is. It is not in thinking up new proposals, and therefore 100% effort at the moment is to ensure we understand the risk that should direct our work, and that we direct our work appropriately to give us the best possible chance to collect the revenue due. And that was according to Kieswetter. And I've got some figures here. This tax agency collected 1.2 trillion rand for 2018-2019 financial year, which was 14.6 billion rand, or 1.1% short of the revised estimate of 1.3, which they wanted to achieve, or collection that they wanted to achieve as per the 2019 February budget. However, it still represented growth of 71.2 billion rands, or 5.8% from the 1.2 trillion collected in 2017. So there was a growth even last year. But now they want to get 1.422 trillion. Do you think it's possible?
I think it probably is possible.
Yeah.
But putting a bit of jeopardy on those numbers, again, I mean, I hate to repeat myself, is that where taxpayers, especially those who are abroad, who look at this notice and says, happy days, I am earning employment income from one employer, although be it a foreign employer, and I don't earn any other income. Those guys, I mean, those taxpayers are not going to submit the tax, might not submit the tax return. And that would definitely jeopardize that number.
Thamsanqa Msiza, thank you very much, my brother, for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure, Aubrey.
Great
Thank
stuff.
You for having me on.
Right. He's Senior Tax Consultant at Tax Consulting South Africa.